There is a chapter in the Bible that most people skim past on their way to somewhere more interesting. It sits in the middle of Leviticus, sandwiched between laws about skin diseases and rules about lampstands. And on the surface, it looks like an ancient religious calendar. 7 feasts, specific dates, detailed instructions about what to wave, what to burn, what to eat, and when. For most readers, it reads like the fine print of a contract nobody remembers signing. Pages of agricultural rituals from a desert culture that lived 3,500 years ago, easy to skip, easy to dismiss, easy to file away as ancient and irrelevant. But here is what almost nobody tells you. That chapter, Leviticus 23, is not a calendar. It is a countdown. It is a prophecy written in the language of bread and harvest and trumpets. And when you trace those 7 feasts from Mount Sinai all the way to the cross, to Pentecost, and into the still unfulfilled chapters of Revelation, you discover something staggering. God did not just give Israel a religious calendar. He gave them a timeline of redemption. Every feast a chapter, every chapter a fulfillment, and 4 of them have already happened down to the hour. 3 of them have not. Yet, let me set the scene. The year is approximately 1446 BC. Israel has just been delivered from 400 years of slavery in Egypt. They are camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, 1 million people in a desert, learning how to be a nation instead of a workforce. And God, through Moses, hands them a covenant that includes something curious. He calls them moedim, the Hebrew word translated as feasts in most English Bibles. But moedim does not actually mean feasts. It comes from the root yod, meaning to appoint or to fix a meeting. A moed is an appointed time, a divine appointment, a meeting on God's calendar. Leviticus 23:2 says, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts." Notice the wording, my feasts. Not Israel's feasts, not Jewish feasts, God's feasts, written on God's calendar for God's purposes. And that distinction changes everything. Because if these are God's appointments, then they are not arbitrary cultural rituals. They are scheduled rendezvous between heaven and history. And the question becomes not what do these feasts mean, but what does God plan to do on each one? The Hebrew word holy convocation is mikra, and mikra does not mean a quiet religious gathering. It comes from the root kara, meaning to call out, to summon, to proclaim. A mikra was a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal for something coming. Israel was being called together not just to worship, but to practice, to act out in advance the story God was going to tell in real time. For 1,500 years they would practice, and then the curtain would lift. There are 7 of them, 7 feasts, and the number itself is no accident. 7 is the number of completion in Hebrew thought. 7 days of creation, 7 branches on the menorah, 7 seals in Revelation. The God who built the universe in 7 movements wrote his redemptive plan in 7 movements too. And these 7 are grouped into 2 clusters, 4 spring feasts that fall in the Hebrew month of Nisan and Sivan, and 3 fall feasts that all happen within a single 30-day window in the month of Tishri. Between the 2 clusters is a gap, a long stretch of months where no feasts occur. Hold on to that gap. It matters more than you can imagine. The first feast is Passover, Pesach in Hebrew. Leviticus 23:5 says, "On the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Lord's Passover." The instructions given originally in Exodus 12 are precise. On the 10th day of the month, each family chooses a lamb, a male without blemish in its first year. They keep it in their home for 4 days. They inspect it. They get to know it. They watch it eat. They watch it sleep. They watch their children play with it. And then, on the 14th day, at twilight, they slaughter it. They paint its blood on the doorposts. They roast it whole and eat it that night. And the angel of death passes over every home marked with the blood. Now, here is the part most people never realize. The 4 days of inspection were not random. They were a model of something coming. 15 centuries later, a man rode into Jerusalem on a donkey on the 10th day of Nisan. The crowds waved palm branches and shouted Hosanna. For 4 days he was inspected. The Pharisees questioned him. The Sadducees tried to trap him. Herod's officials watched him. The chief priests scrutinized every word. And after 4 days of public examination, the verdict came back the same one given to the original Passover lambs. Pilate said it himself in John 19:4. I find no fault in him." 3 times Pilate declared his innocence. 3 times a Roman governor unknowingly certified that the lamb was without blemish. And then on the 14th day of Nisan, at the exact hour the Passover lambs were being slaughtered in the temple courtyard, Jesus said, "It is finished," and died on a Roman cross. The Greek word he used was tetelestai. It was a word used in commerce to mean paid in full. It was stamped on bills when the debt was settled. The lamb, who was inspected for 4 days and found without fault, paid the debt at the exact hour the symbol of his sacrifice was being slaughtered a few hundred yards away. Paul writes it plainly in 1 Corinthians 5:7, "For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us, not figuratively, not metaphorically, on the actual day, at the actual hour." Feast number 1 fulfilled to the minute. The second feast follows immediately. Unleavened bread, Hag HaMatzot. Leviticus 23:6 says, "On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. For 7 days, no leaven, no yeast, no rising agent of any kind." In Hebrew thought, leaven was almost always a symbol of sin. It puffs up. It spreads silently. A little bit corrupts the whole batch. Paul uses this image directly in 1 Corinthians 5:6. "Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump?" And during this feast, every Israelite household had to search their home, every corner, every shelf, every crack in the floor, and remove every trace of leaven. In modern Jewish practice, this search is still observed. Families take a candle, a feather, and a wooden spoon and walk through every room looking for hidden bits of bread. It is called bidikat shametz, the search for leaven, a picture of inspection, a picture of the human heart being searched for hidden corruption. Now think about what happened the day after Passover. Jesus, whose body had no leaven, no sin, no corruption, was placed in a tomb. Acts 2:27 quotes Psalm 16. "You will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption." The unleavened bread of heaven was buried in the earth. For 3 days his body lay in a sealed tomb, and it did not decay. It did not corrupt. The feast that commanded the removal of all corruption was being fulfilled in real time by a body that could not corrupt. And here is a detail worth slowing down for. The matzah used in Passover is unique. It is pierced, it has stripes burned into it from the baking process. Isaiah 53:5 had said, "He was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed." The bread itself preached the gospel for 15 centuries, pierced and striped, unleavened and broken, buried for 3 days and brought up in resurrection power. Feast number 2. The third feast happens within that same week, first fruits, Bikurim. Leviticus 23:10-11. "When you come into the land which I give to you, and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it." The day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week, Sunday. The barley harvest in Israel begins in the spring. The very first sheaf, the first fruits, was cut, bundled, and waved before the Lord as a promise, a pledge that the rest of the harvest was coming. The wave offering was not the harvest itself. It was a guarantee of the harvest, a down payment from heaven, the first installment of a much larger reaping that was already in motion. The farmer who waved that first sheaf was saying with his actions, "There is more coming, much more. This is just the first." And on the day after the Sabbath, on the first day of the week, on the morning of first fruits, the stone rolled back, the tomb was empty. And Paul, with surgical precision, writes in 1 Corinthians 15:20, "But now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep." He does not say Christ is like the firstfruits. He says Christ is the firstfruits, the wave offering of heaven, the guarantee that the harvest of resurrection is coming. Feast number 3, fulfilled on the exact day. And here is something almost nobody mentions. Matthew 27:52-53 records a strange detail that most readers blow past. The graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When Jesus rose, he did not rise alone. A small first harvest came up with him. The wave offering was not a single sheaf, it was a sheaf representing many, and those resurrected saints were the proof that the rest of the harvest is coming. 3 feasts, 3 fulfillments, 3 days: Passover, unleavened bread, firstfruits, death, burial, resurrection. The calendar God handed to Moses on a mountain in 1446 BC laid out the gospel weekend with mathematical precision 15 centuries before it happened. Every detail rehearsed for 1,500 years until the actor finally stepped onto the stage and performed every line on cue. If you are starting to see something here that you did not see before, take a second and share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Because the 4th feast is where the story takes a turn nobody expects. 50 days after firstfruits comes the 4th feast, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. Most Christians know it by its Greek name, Pentecost, which simply means 50th. Leviticus 23:15-16 says, "You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord." The 50 days of counting still happen in Jewish practice today. It is called counting the Omer. Every night for 50 nights between Passover and Pentecost, observant Jews count the days aloud. It is a stretching anticipation, a long deliberate walk between deliverance and provision, between being freed and being filled. This was the wheat harvest, and the offering was different from every other feast. The priest waved 2 loaves of bread, made with fine flour, baked with leaven. Read that again. Baked with leaven. In every other feast offering, leaven was forbidden. But on Shavuot, the 2 loaves had to contain leaven. Why? In Jewish tradition, Shavuot also commemorates the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. Exodus 19 records that Israel arrived at Sinai in the 3rd month, around the same time Shavuot would later fall. And on that day when the law was given, 3,000 Israelites died because of the golden calf incident in Exodus 32:28. The day the law was written on stone, 3,000 died. The law revealed sin, and sin revealed death. Paul makes the connection in 2 Corinthians 3:6. The letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now fast forward 15 centuries. Acts chapter 2. When the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. The disciples are gathered in Jerusalem. Suddenly there is a sound like a rushing mighty wind. Tongues of fire rest on each of them. Peter stands up and preaches the first sermon of the church age, and Acts 2:41 records the result. Then those who gladly received his word were baptized, and that day about 3,000 souls were added to them, the same number. The law killed 3,000. The Spirit gave life to 3,000 on the same feast. The contrast is so precise it cannot be coincidence. The law written on stone produced death. The Spirit written on hearts produced life. The mountain that once shook with fire and thunder and warned the people to keep their distance now sent that same fire down to rest on the heads of ordinary people in an upper room. The distance was gone, and the 2 loaves with leaven, the loaves that broke the pattern of every other feast, were a portrait of something the prophets had only hinted at. 2 peoples, Jew and Gentile, both with the leaven of sin still present in them, both presented before God as one offering. Ephesians 2:14 says it plainly, "For he himself is our peace, who has made both one." The church, this strange new community of Jew and Gentile together, was prophesied 1,500 years in advance by 2 loaves of leavened bread waved before God on a spring morning. Feast number 4 fulfilled on the exact day. So now stop and look at what we have. 4 feasts, all in the spring. All fulfilled in real time by Jesus' Passover, the cross; unleavened bread, the burial; firstfruits, the resurrection; Pentecost, the birth of the church; and then nothing. The biblical calendar goes quiet. 4 months of summer pass, no feasts, no appointments, nothing on God's calendar. From the Hebrew month of Sivan all the way through Av, the calendar is empty. It is the longest stretch in the religious year. And that gap, that long summer silence, is where we are right now. We are living in the gap between Feast 4 and Feast 5. The Apostle Paul calls this gap a mystery. Romans 11:25. "I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. The fullness of the Gentiles, the harvest of nations, the summer that comes between the spring planting and the fall reaping. We are living in the season between Feast 4 and Feast 5. The wheat is ripening. The fields are growing. The master is patient, and the calendar is still running, even when the appointments seem to pause. Jesus himself spoke about this season in John 4:35. Do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. 4 months. The exact stretch between Pentecost and the fall feasts. He was not just talking about literal farming. He was reading the calendar out loud. The harvest is coming. The season of silence is the season of growth, and Feast 5 is something else entirely. It comes in the Hebrew month of Tishri, on the first day. Leviticus 23:24. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation, the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah. In modern Judaism, it is called Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, but in the biblical text it is named for one thing, the blowing of trumpets, specifically the shofar, a ram's horn. And in Jewish tradition, this is the day no man knows the day or the hour. The reason is fascinating. Yom Teruah falls on the first day of the 7th month. But the first day of a Hebrew month was determined by the sighting of the new moon. 2 witnesses had to physically see the thin sliver of the new moon and report it to the Sanhedrin. The feast could not begin until that sighting was confirmed. Sometimes clouds covered the sky. Sometimes the moon was difficult to spot. So the only feast on God's calendar, where the exact moment of beginning was unknown, was the Feast of Trumpets. Jesus said something almost identical in Matthew 24:36. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. He was using language his Jewish audience would have recognized instantly. He was pointing to Yom Teruah. He was telling them which feast he was talking about without naming it. The crowd standing in front of him would have understood. The disciples writing it down would have understood. The Jewish reader of the gospel would have nodded knowingly. The day no man knows, the feast of the hidden hour. And Paul, writing about the gathering of believers to meet the Lord, says in 1 Corinthians 15:51-52, Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible. The trumpet, the last trumpet of the Feast of Trumpets. In Jewish tradition, 100 shofar blasts are blown on Yom Teruah, and the final blast is called the Tekiah Gedolah, the great trumpet, the long blast, the sound that goes on longer than any other. Paul is not using random imagery. He is pointing to a feast his Jewish readers had observed every year of their lives. The dead will be raised at the great trumpet. Feast number 5, not yet fulfilled. 10 days after the Feast of Trumpets comes the 6th feast, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the most solemn day on the Jewish calendar. Leviticus 23:27-28. Also the 10th day of this 7th month shall be the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work on that same day. This was the only day of the year the high priest entered the Holy of Holies. He sacrificed a bull for his own sins, then a goat for the sins of the people. Then he took a second goat, the scapegoat, laid his hands on its head, confessed the sins of the nation over it, and sent it into the wilderness to be lost forever. 2 goats, 2 pictures. One paying the penalty, the other carrying the sin away. The Hebrew name for the scapegoat was Azazel, and it was led away into a desolate place, never to return. The sin of the nation went with it. For Israel, Yom Kippur was a day of national reckoning. The 10 days between trumpets and atonement were called the Days of Aweh, a period of repentance and soul-searching. Every Jew was expected to examine their life, make peace with anyone they had wronged, confess their sins, and prepare their heart. And on the 10th day, judgment was rendered. Names were sealed. The fate of the nation for the coming year was determined. The prophet Zechariah, looking centuries forward, describes a day when Israel as a nation will finally see the one they pierced. Zechariah 12:10. And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son. A national day of recognition, a national day of mourning, a national day of atonement. And Paul confirms this in Romans 11:26. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. A national turning, a national recognition of the Messiah they once rejected. The high priest who entered the Holy of Holies once a year with the blood of a goat is replaced by the great high priest who entered once for all with his own blood. Hebrews 9:12. And the day Israel as a nation finally recognizes that the goat was always a shadow of the Messiah will be the ultimate Yom Kippur. Feast number 6, not yet fulfilled. And then the 7th feast. 5 days after Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, or as some translations call it, the Feast of Booths. Leviticus 23:42-43. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. For 7 days, every Israelite family built a small temporary shelter, a sukkah, and lived in it. The walls were flimsy. The roof was made of branches so you could see the stars through it. It was a celebration of God's presence with his people during their 40 years of wandering. A reminder that the God who dwelt in the tabernacle in the wilderness dwelt with them. The Hebrew word sukkah means a temporary dwelling, a booth, a tent. And the Apostle John, writing the most theological gospel of all, opens his book with this, John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Greek word for dwelt is skinu. It literally means to tabernacle, to pitch a tent. It is not behitzing subtle. He is kistok that when Jesus came, the eternal Word tabernacled with us, Sukkot, the feast of God dwelling with his people. Some scholars have noted that the timing of Jesus' birth, when carefully traced through the priestly course of Zechariah described in Luke 1, points to a fall birth around the time of Sukkot rather than December. The Word became flesh and tabernacled with us, possibly during the very feast that celebrated God tabernacling with his people. Sukkot was also called the season of joy, Zeman Simchatenu in Hebrew, and it was the most joyful feast on the calendar. Pilgrims came from all over Israel. The temple courts were filled with music, dancing, and the waving of palm branches and citrons. On the last and greatest day of the feast, the high priest poured out water from the pool of Siloam at the base of the altar, a ceremony asking God to send rain for the coming year. And it was on that exact day, the last day of Sukkot, that John 7:37 records this. On the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." He was standing in the temple courts on the day the priest poured out water, claiming to be the source of the very water the ceremony was begging for. He was telling everyone present that the feast they were celebrating was about him, but the full fulfillment is still future. Revelation 21:3 announces it. "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God." The Feast of Tabernacles is the final feast on the calendar because the dwelling of God with humanity is the final scene of the Bible. A 1,000-year reign, according to Revelation 20. Then a new heaven and a new earth, a city where the tabernacle is no longer temporary, where the booth becomes the throne room, where the stars seen through the branches become the actual ceiling of the eternal home. Feast number 7, the final appointment. Zechariah 14:16 even prophesies that in the millennial kingdom, all nations will come up to Jerusalem year after year to worship the King and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. The feast that was once for Israel alone becomes a feast for every nation. The booth that was once a Jewish tradition becomes a global celebration. The God who dwelt in a tent in the wilderness will dwell forever with a redeemed humanity. Now look at the whole pattern. 7 feasts, 4 already fulfilled in the spring of fulfillment, 3 waiting in the fall. And the gap between them, the long summer harvest, is the era of the church, the time of the Gentiles, the season we are living in right now. If you have been reading Scripture and feeling like you are missing the architecture of the whole thing, this is part of why. The feasts are the load-bearing beams. They hold the story together, and nobody points them out. But here is what stays with me most. Think about a wedding invitation, not a generic flyer, an actual handwritten invitation from someone who loves you. It tells you the date, the time, the place, what to wear, where to park. Every detail is intentional because the person sending it wants you to be there. They are not hiding the event. They are not making it a guessing game. They are inviting you in. That is what Leviticus 23 is. It is not a museum exhibit of ancient religious customs. It is an invitation written in the only language God uses for important things, the language of appointment, the language of timing, the language of being expected. For 500 years, Israel kept these appointments and did not know what they were rehearsing. They slaughtered Passover lambs without knowing they were modeling a cross. They removed leaven from their homes without knowing they were picturing a sinless body in a tomb. They waved sheaves of barley without knowing they were prophesying a resurrection on the third day. They counted 50 days to Pentecost without knowing they were counting down to the birth of a global church. The dress rehearsals went on for 15 centuries. The actors did not know they were acting. The script was hidden in plain sight. And then in 3 years and 7 weeks, the actor stepped onto the stage and performed every line perfectly. And maybe the part that hits hardest is this. If God fulfilled the spring feasts down to the exact day and hour, then there is no reason to think He will not fulfill the fall feasts the same way. The trumpet will sound. The Day of Atonement will come. The tabernacle of God will be with men. The calendar is not just history. It is a promise. And every promise God has ever made, He has kept on time. There is something else here that is easy to miss. Notice that the spring feasts and the fall feasts are not symmetrical. The spring feasts are about salvation. The fall feasts are about consummation. The spring feasts brought Jesus to earth as the suffering servant. The fall feasts bring Him back as the returning King. The spring feasts dealt with sin. The fall feasts deal with sovereignty. The spring feasts inaugurated the kingdom. The fall feasts will establish it forever. The same calendar holds both. The same God authored both, and there is a deeper rhythm here too. The spring feasts cluster tightly together. Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits all happen within a single week. Pentecost arrives 50 days later. The fall feasts also cluster tightly. Trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles all happen within a single month. When God acts, He acts in bursts. Long stretches of silence, then concentrated movements. The pattern of the feasts is the pattern of redemption history. Long preparation, then sudden fulfillment. So what do you do with all this? You do not need to start celebrating the feasts to be a Christian. Paul makes that clear in Colossians 2:16-17. Let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. The feasts were shadows. Christ is the substance. You do not worship the shadow once the substance has arrived, but you also do not throw out the shadow, because shadows tell you something is real. Shadows prove there is a body casting them, and the 7 feasts of Leviticus 23 are the shadow that proves. The cross was no accident, the resurrection was no coincidence, Pentecost was no surprise, and the return of Christ will not catch heaven unprepared. There is a strange comfort in knowing that the God who runs the universe keeps appointments. He is not running late. He is not rearranging His schedule. He is not surprised by the headlines. The calendar He gave to Moses 3,500 years ago is still the calendar He is running, and every name on the guest list of the final feast is already written. Yours, if you have answered the invitation, included. The God who scheduled the first Passover lamb at twilight on the 14th of Nisan is the same God who scheduled your name. He keeps His appointments, all of them. And the calendar He hung on the wall of Israel 3,500 years ago is still running. 4 feasts down, 3 to go. And somewhere on that calendar, in handwriting older than the stars, your name is already written into the guest list of the final feast, the booth that becomes a kingdom, the tent that becomes a city, the tabernacle that becomes home. If this opens something up for you, help someone else find it. Subscribe, drop a comment, even one word. Share this with someone who loves the Bible, and keep us in your prayers. God bless you.